Hi, welcome to class today. I'm Elaine Engelhardt from Utah Valley State, and I'd like to welcome you to our discussion on Thomas Hobbes. In our last class period, we talked about Sermon on the Mount and had a very strong discussion on divine command theory and where Jesus Christ's ethic fits into this. And now we're moving into more of our Enlightenment philosophers and Thomas Hobbes and how he fits into a different ethic known as rights. And helping us today with our discussion is Dr. David Keller. Welcome, David. I'll come back to you and ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, but I'll introduce the students first. Over here we have Cassie and John. Thank you. And over here, Rhonda and Lloyd. Thanks for joining us. So David, tell us a little bit about yourself and some of your interests.
Well, I've been here at Utah Valley State for 10 years now, and I'm director of the Center for the Study of Ethics, and I'm an associate professor of philosophy. And recently I've been working on establishing an environmental studies program here at UVSC, which will be an interdisciplinary program weaving together themes from the natural sciences and the humanities.
Well, thank you. And David really does a lot of work for us here at Utah Valley State. He's been director of the Center for the Study of Ethics for numerous years and puts together programs for students, faculty, administrators, and the entire community. And we love inviting the community into our forums. They help tie the concepts that we learn in this class into actual experiences, actual problems or controversies that are happening in the state, in the country, sometimes even globally. And that's a very fun and important activity, I would suppose, David.
It is. Oh,
thank you. Well, our author today is Thomas Hobbes, and it's entitled Convention. And we see that the title of this is quite important because he's dealing with rights and he's also dealing with absolute relativism. And a lot of times when people hear the word relativism, then they say, "Oh, wow, this isn't a concept that I'm going to have with which I'll have much agreement." But not so with Hobbes, because we'll see as this unpacks that he picks his rights ethics and says, where do we get these? Where do our rights come from? Do we pick them out of the air? How can we decide which ones are the best? And why is Hobbes so important in establishing a rights ethic, David?
Well, Thomas Hobbes is important in the history of Western moral philosophy for the reason that he attempted to ground ethics and political philosophy in science and the natural world. And this is quite different than the approach taken by the medieval and ancient Greek philosophers. For example, Plato and Socrates looked to a supernatural realm, the forms, to ground their ethics. And Thomas Hobbes, with this new spirit of scientific discovery, really tried to ground ethics and politics in science.
Okay, and besides this scientific revolution that's going on that's so exciting for Hobbes, he's a true interdisciplinarian. Hobbes is also just coming out of feudalism, and this has been tough for a lot of folks. Tell us a little bit about what feudalism is, David.
Well, feudalism was a social, economic, political system that predated the rise of capitalism and the Enlightenment, and it was a system in which the aristocratic leaders, landowners, would own all the means of production, and people like you and I would be the serfs or the people working the land, but we were never the landowners. So we were indentured essentially to the aristocrats who owned all the land. And this political system ultimately would give way to free market capitalism.
Okay, thank you. And so, Cassie, you can see that we're moving away from feudalism, and he's going to see that we all need to be equal, that we're all equal. No one's better than anyone else. And he also wants you to have rights. How do you think equality and rights are going to tie in together?
Well, if we're all equal, then we all deserve the same rights, and we're all, yeah.
So it sounds a little bit like democracy,
right.
Maybe.
Yeah,
okay.
Definitely.
And we find that many of our founders of the American system of government had read Hobbes, and it incorporated some of his principles into the Declaration of Independence, some writing that we'll find in the Constitution as well. Any thoughts on that, any of you? Okay. The next thing we need to know about Hobbes is he is an egoist. Now, Dr. Keller, David, what's the difference between an egoist and an egotist?
One has an extra T in it. No, in all seriousness, even though the two words sound so similar, they are vastly different. And for the purposes of us as philosophers, we need to make sure that we're very clear on the difference. In everyday language, an egotist, of course, just means somebody who is vain and self-centered and narcissistic. But egoism is a very robust and well-developed body of theory, both in psychology and philosophy. And it means basically that our actions are centered around a calculated analysis of how those actions will benefit us. So the egoist would say, if I do something nice for you, I'm really planning on reaping the benefit for myself in the long run, my ego. And it's a very important theory that has an impact both in ethics but also psychology.
Okay, thank you. As you're doing the reading, will you notice where this egoism then does come in throughout Hobbes? Because he's going to, if you're wondering Hobbes's reasoning for doing something, it's going to be because it benefits me.
Exactly.
And he's going to say, the reason why you need to avoid war is because it benefits you. And so that will usually be the good answer to it. Lloyd, any comments on this?
Yeah, something I was thinking about. Unlike the philosopher that we're going to discuss next, Kant, where we'll see Kant tries to figure out things with his mind. Hobbes, in a lot of ways, in the spirit of science and whatnot, looks at humanity, looks at people, and wants to understand how people work and how people react. And that's one of the things that he'll eventually see. Is he'll see, okay, people are self-serving, and that's one way society works, is that people are trying to benefit themselves in other aspects. So he's trying to build his philosophy and his morals out of an empirical study of society.
Okay.
That's right.
Other thoughts on Kant, things that you liked or found difficult in the reading? How about you, John?
You mean Hobbes?
Oh, sorry. I meant to say Hobbes, yes. I can hardly wait to get into the Kant discussion too, but I like Hobbes. I really do like studying Hobbes.
I like Hobbes too. I like that he grounds things in science. He's always trying to do that, and I think that it's somewhat honest to say that we are all egoists in some way. I mean, in a lot of ways, I think it's unavoidable that when we do something, that action is going to be informed by our own desires in some way. I think it's fairly honest.
All right, thank you. How about you, Cassie?
I think it's interesting. I did enjoy reading it, and I thought it was interesting, or at least I felt a lot of the time that, I don't know, his view of man seemed very animalistic or
Sure.
And I don't know, I think that's interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think I agree with parts of it, and yeah, I thought that was interesting.
All right, and Rhonda, any thoughts on Hobbes? I will stay with Hobbes for this session.
Hobbes to me appears to be certainly a realist. You know, that he ascribes to each person the same humanity or is it unhumanity?
Inhumanity.
Inhumanity to each person. To me, he strips off the layers of the flesh and gives each person an equality.
And in fact, that's how he starts out this reading, doesn't he? Mm-hmm. He starts it out by saying, hey, everybody's got something that makes them a little more superior to someone else. And everybody's got something where they think they're better than someone else. And we just, which sounds a little bit like being an egotist, but he's going to fully pull this back into egoism. And he's going to say, but there are reasons why we need to get along in society. Mm-hmm. And some of these reasons can be to protect the things that we have, the people around us, and just to get along. So let's go ahead and develop some of this and pull up our first reading. Lloyd, would you read that for us, please?
Sure. Of appetites and aversions, some are born with men, as appetite of food. The rest, which are appetites of particular things, proceed from experience and trial of their effects upon themselves or other men. For if things we know not at all, or believe not to be, we can have no further desire than to taste and try. But aversion we have for things, not only which we know have hurt us, but also that we do not know whether they will hurt us or not.
Okay, so Lloyd, here we've got some, we're starting with some egoism here, aren't we? And how is his theory starting to develop as you read this first slide?
Well, he's basically saying, like, he's saying, look, he looks at humanity, and he says, look, people either like something or they don't like something. They either have an aversion for it or an appetite for it. They want it or they don't. And so he's saying that's how they work. And he says, well, there's some things that they don't know about, and in that case, they'll taste it or try it out, and then from that point on, they'll either have an aversion or an appetite. So there's things people want or things people don't want.
Okay, and if we have an aversion for it or even develop a fear, David, then is this something that he says is going to motivate us?
Yes, we are seeing the elements of the egoistic philosophy bubble to the surface here, and this connects both to a point that Cassie made and Rhonda, and that is that he is treating human beings in our animalistic nature, and or as you said, Rhonda, he's peeling back kind of the layers of our outer self to see what's underneath, and what is underneath for Hobbes is somewhat of a mechanistic animal. And as Lloyd just read, we will be attracted to things that we desire almost in a mechanistic, deterministic way, and we will avoid things that we are either fearful of or we find repugnant. And so again, we see how Hobbes is treating us as natural beings of the earth, of the world.
All right, thank you. Other comments or questions on this? Well, let's move on to the next slide then. And Cassie, would you read this for us?
Sure. Good and evil is relative, but whatsoever is the object of any man's appetite or desire, that is it which he, for his part, calls good. And the object of his hate and aversion, evil, and of his contempt, vile and inconsiderable. For these words of good, evil, and contemptible are ever used with relation to the person that uses them, there being nothing simply and absolutely so.
Okay, and so, John, we're back to using this word relative. He's going to say that good and evil is relative. Tell us a little bit about where he's going with this.
Well, it's a lot. It's unlike what we've studied before with Christian ethics, where there is a God that is telling us what is good and evil and so on, and that he's really saying that really we're just people and we're experiencing things and we're going to make value judgments on what we experience. We're going to say this thing's good or this thing's evil depending on our experience of it, and that's where these value judgments ultimately come from, is just our experience rather than from a God. Okay,
and how about it? Lloyd or Rhonda, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think an analogy could be made of a child, or let's say myself. Growing up, I didn't like green peppers at all. Mm-hmm. I still don't like green peppers. But so for me, green peppers are evil. But John, for example, or someone else may really like green peppers, and so he might call it good. And so that whether or not it's good or evil is really subjective and relative to us individually, depending on our own appetites and aversions.
Okay, and Dr. Keller, would some people find that just a little threatening? That good and evil can be relative?
Well, from Socrates to the present day, people have been very disconcerted that, as John said, good and evil are not rooted in something transcendent above the material world, and that, as Lloyd has just pointed out, they may fluctuate from person to person, and for some people, this sort of this unsecure or a fluid basis for ethics is something that is to be avoided, and so some people would be very uncomfortable with where Hobbes is going.
In fact, people were uncomfortable with where Hobbes is going, and he's going to be saying, wait, let me unpack this, give me a chance. But other folks kind of felt like he needed to leave England and head on over to France for a while. I think you said you heard that he'd gone on to Amsterdam even.
Yeah, he traveled a lot, I think, fleeing his reputation.
Yeah, but eventually it ended up in England. I think that people finally came around to understanding how rights, individual rights and society rights fit into his notions of relativism.
Which at the time
Yeah.
would have been extremely difficult if we're just coming out of this feudal system. Nobody wants to make everyone equal.
No,
That's right.
no. You're going to bankrupt everybody who doesn't want to be bankrupt.
And that is a very good point, because equality for us today is something that is very standard and normal. But at this time, there was a radical concept because it defied the aristocracy and the hierarchy of society. So while much of what Hobbes is saying may seem easy to take within a democratic, egalitarian framework like we have today, at the time he was a radical.
All right, thank you. Other thoughts or comments, Cassie?
Yeah, going back to the idea of there being no right or wrong, and or not no right or wrong, but it being subjective. I think that kind of ties into to the animalistic approach that this seems to have. Mm-hmm. If you look at nature and, I don't know, things that occur in nature, we don't look at nature and say, oh, that is wrong for that bear to kill that deer or anything like that, because that is, I don't know, that's the nature of it, and it's, I don't know, that's more animalistic, I think.
Good, and Hobbes is even going to talk about that. He's going to say we have these laws of nature, but he's going to say, we can get around those too. Mm-hmm. And we can become a society that isn't so warlike, and we really can get along with each other. And so he'll bring us out of those laws of nature as well. Let's go ahead and pull up the next graphic, and this has already been alluded to, but would you read this for us, John?
Men equal in body and mind. Nature has made men as equal in the faculties of the body and mind as that through there be found one man sometimes manifestly stronger in body or of quicker mind than another. Yet, when all is reckoned together, the difference between man and man is not so considerable.
Okay, so he says, listen, we're all pretty equal here. And once again, this is another thesis. He wants us to know we're equal, and one person does something better than another can do something in a superior fashion. Anything further on that, David?
No, it just means that each one of us have our unique skills, and some of us are better at some things than other things. But what Hobbes is saying is taking all our attributes together collectively in the state of nature, in the natural condition of the world, we're pretty equal, and nobody is vastly superior in mind or body than anyone else.
All right, perfect. And let's go ahead and read the next graphic on this. And Rhonda, would you read that?
Sure. In fact, I really like this particular graphic of what it says. Cause of contention between men. From this equality of ability arises equality of hope in the attaining of our ends. And therefore, if any two men desire the same thing, which nevertheless they cannot both enjoy, they become enemies, and in the way to their end, which is principally their own conservation, and sometimes their delectation only, endeavor to destroy or subdue one another.
Okay, so he's saying, so now we're going to find ourselves in a cause of quarrel. And a cause of quarrel can move into a state of war, and we really want to avoid these kind of things. And so he's setting up a premise for saying, and I've got a really good idea that's going to help you get through these kinds of situations, because you have something and Lloyd wants it, and now you're going to end up in a cause of quarrel. Anything you'd like to add to that, David?
No, we're just saying his line of reasoning really become crystallized here. He's grounded his ethics in the physical, material, natural world, and in the state of nature we desire the same things, maybe the same piece of land, home, mate, so on and so forth. So there's going to be continual fighting and contention for limited resources, really.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Rhonda.
I think one of the reasons that I really like this particular graphic is because of the word hope. again, at that period of time, or this period of time, when you give anybody a degree of hope that they can become equal, instead of always being pushed down, then, with the other person who has all the toys, it's extremely irritating. And then I think that's when we become ingratiated into war.
Sure. So it can be on an individual level. It can move right on into a national level, international level. So we see it in many contexts. Yes, John.
So is it right to say that he's saying that all conflict kind of arises from a struggle for resources?
He's going to say we're egoists, and we all want what we want.
And like you just said, that is really politically applicable to today, because we could see the conflict in the world as a struggle for resources. That wouldn't be...
very Hobbesian,
yeah,
sure.
That would be...
How about that, Dr. Keller?
Well, I think John has made a very good point, and that is, people of this orientation, this naturalistic Hobbesian orientation would say, the human condition has changed in some ways. We have different technologies and so on and so forth, but we still live on Earth, and we still compete for limited natural resources, and that is the way the human condition has been in the past, it's the way it is now, and it's the way it will be in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so he's going to say, let's see if we can just get along. So let's pull up our next graphic, and this next slide, Lloyd, is going to tell us that this is what ends up as generally our three causes of quarrel.
All right. So that in the nature of man, we find three principal causes of quarrel. First, competition. Second, diffidence. Third, glory.
Okay, so he's going to tell us we've got these three areas where we're always ending up in a state of war. First, competition. Tell me a little bit about competition. How is it that we end up in war over competition? Lloyd, do you want to handle that one?
Just looking at a very micro scale, just when I go tend my two nephews,
yes.
they've got one little radio-controlled toy, and they both want to play for it, and so they start competing and start fighting and battling over who gets to use the little toy, and that's really just a smaller version of what goes on. That's just a smaller version of war of what goes on between nations when they start fighting over oil or other kind of resources.
Okay, very good. And on page 19 in your reading, second column, it's going to help you see these 3 points where we have competition, diffidence, and glory, and these being the 3 reasons why we do go to war. So competition being the most major. You've got something I want, and I'm going to compete with you to take it, show I'm superior, and take it away, even if it's just a little radio-controlled toy. Did you want to add anything to that, John?
Not right now.
Okay. How about it, David? Anything that you have for that one?
No, Lloyd provided the very good microcosm of a macrocosmic phenomenon, and that is that whether it's a radio-controlled toy or a fertile delta good for agriculture or a river, humans are going to compete over these same things.
Okay, and then maybe Rhonda can tell us a little bit about diffidence. What does it mean to compete to want to go to a battle over diffidence?
Isn't diffidence having to do with safety?
Yeah, defense, safety. Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants to guard and protect what is theirs.
Very good. And so if someone comes after your radio-controlled toy, you're going to guard and protect it. Or maybe if someone comes after your family or loved ones, you're going to defend and protect those. Any other thoughts on that? And how about, do you have any, David?
Well, diffidence also has a connotation of ambition. Humans are intrinsically ambitious, and we want to improve our daily lives and our condition. And so this is, the motivation behind competition. If we weren't ambitious, then we wouldn't compete. And so again, as a psychological egoist, Hobbes is going to say human beings are naturally ambitious, and that's going to bring us into competition for the same things.
But aren't human beings only ambitious as long as they can get gain? If they can acquire something? If you take away the ability to win something, don't you take away a man's ambition?
That's right, and that connects to the earlier point that because we're roughly equal, at the end of the day, we have, as you pointed out yourself, hope that we can improve the state of our lives. And Lloyd might be vastly more intelligent than I am, but I'm a little quicker than he is on foot. And so it gives both of us hope that we can be ambitious, and that's going to bring us into competition.
So David makes such an excellent point with this too, is saying don't ever put the rose-colored glasses on with Hobbes, even on the point of diffidence, because he's always an egoist. Okay, we will always be looking at egoism with this as well. And then his third point is glory. So he's going to say 3 reasons we go to war, 3 reasons for causes of quarrel: competition, diffidence, and glory. And do you want to try glory for us, Cassie?
Sure. I mean, they're all kind of related. You're either you're fighting for something, and glory, your status, your position. Yeah.
Yeah, this is where it really means a lot to you.
Vanity.
Yeah, it's vanity. It really means a lot to you to have that radio-controlled toy. It's a status thing of all the other kids in the neighborhood, you know, for you to have this. Or whatever else it might be, and it's important to go and take that away from someone else who might have it, so that you have it and you're seen as the best. Anything that you'd like to add to that, Lloyd? Any comments?
I think also going on with this idea of hope. I mean, one of the things that your reputation, your glory, you want is you want to be able to feel like that you can get more gain, and that you can defend yourself more. So the more hope and the more glory you have, the stronger you feel, and the more you're able to feel like you can achieve those other 2 items as well.
Okay, very good. So we have these, I like the way you put that, by the way. We have these 3 areas, and now he's going to say, now we know the problem, let's keep looking for a solution. And are there ways that we can have some self-control because it's in our best benefit? So he's never going to say, let's have some self-control because we ought to, like Immanuel Kant might say. He said, you have self-control because it's good for me. Okay, I have self-control, it's good for me. Right. Anything you'd like to add to that, David?
You're making a critical transition for us, and that is Hobbes, as an empiricist, as Lloyd pointed out, has laid out a description of the natural state of the human condition on Earth. But then we enter the second part of the stage of his ethics, and that is how can humans as rational egoists improve their condition? Should we just be content remaining in this natural condition, or is there something more we can do with our rationality? And so we enter his ethics and his political philosophy.
Okay, thank you. And now we'll start with that reading. And John, would you read this next one for us? War is a tract of time.
Hereby it is manifest that, during the time, men live without a common power to keep them all in awe. They are in that condition which is called war, and such a war as is of every man against every man. All other time is peace.
Okay, thanks. And let's go ahead and read the next graphic as well, because he's going to tell us that war is a time where it's every man against every other man, and it's not a good time. And let's listen to just a little bit more, because this is where we have a very famous statement from Thomas Hobbes. And would you read that for us, Lloyd?
Sure. It's for the natural condition of man. He says, in such condition there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, no navigation nor use of the commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing such things as require much force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death. And the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
Okay. And this may seem like a very cynical passage. It may seem like a very depressing passage from Thomas Hobbes. But he's being very realistic about it too. He's building his theory on it. And the part that you need to remember for the test in this is the very last sentence of that graphic that Lloyd just read to you, where he says, "And the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short." So this is not an area of life that you'd like. You don't want to be in a state of war. And now he's asking you to care enough about you and your own happiness, and especially your own safety, that you might be able to do something about this. Any other thoughts about war? So many things he says about war. You know, he's going to say, once you're in war, you're in war.
Well, the value of this passage is that he's pointing out that in the natural condition of man, there is no civilization. If you're in continual fear of your life and having your accomplishments taken away, why would you spend any effort on building a commodious building or improving the land? Because all of your efforts could be wiped away by a band of renegades coming over the hill and taking it all away from you. So basically what he's saying is there is no civilization. The natural condition of man, in which life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, is the life of the uncivilized person.
Very good.
There is no culture, there's no society, there's no civilization.
And this is also the grounding for saying, so you want civilization, you want to be happy. And he says, and we really should look for peace, have an inclination. But first he's going to tell you, you know what, in war there is no injustice. So Cassie, would you read this for us?
Sure. In war, to this war of every man against every man, this also is consequent, that nothing can be unjust. The notions of right and wrong, justice and injustice have there no place. Where there is no common power, there is no law. Where there is no law, no injustice.
Okay, so David, could this come back to the notions that some war philosophers might say about there are no rules in war, that it's just every person against every person, and basically you need to do what it takes to survive?
That's right. And as Cassie pointed out, in the state of nature, if a cougar or a bear kills a deer, we wouldn't say something bad has happened. We wouldn't say, oh, that murderous bear.
Right.
And similarly, the natural condition of man, because we are animals, for Thomas Hobbes, if I kill you or you kill me, prior to the establishment of civilization, there is no ethical grounds to say, you have done something wrong, I have done something wrong. It's all in the state of nature and things just happen.
But it's not an enjoyable situation. So.
And it's not an enjoyable situation.
No, because basically you're not in a social situation with anyone. You're not in a civilized situation with anyone. You're just surviving. It's
no
like
one's protected.
one of those terrible B-grade movies, you know, where everyone's living behind a rock. What?
There's absolutely no commonality.
Yes.
Nobody cares.
Right. And so he says, so we really have this natural inclination for peace, because you don't want to be living behind a rock. You want to be able to be social. We're social creatures. Mm-hmm. So let's go ahead and read this next graphic that he has. And John, would you do that for us, please?
Inclination for peace. The passions that incline men to peace are fear of death, desire of such things as are necessary to commodious living, and a hope by their industry to obtain them. And reason suggests convenient articles of peace upon which men may be drawn to agreement. These articles are they which otherwise are called the laws of nature.
Okay, very good. And so he's going to say, David, that we're going to look for ways to have peace, once again, because it's good for me. I'm an egoist, according to Hobbes. I must look for peace because it's going to be much better for me. Would you like to add to that?
Yes, and the thing that makes human beings different from other living things is that we are egoists. We're rational, and while cougars and deer and bears will forever be locked into the state of nature. Human beings have one attribute which other animals don't, and that is rationality. And because we're egoists, we will act in our own self-interest and try to get out of this anarchistic state of continual fighting, which is very unpleasant and nerve-wracking.
Okay, very good. So David just mentioned the two very important points that we need to bring up here, and will be test questions. So you have state of nature, and now in this inclination for peace, he's asking for laws of nature. So you have each. The state of nature, basically a state of war, you're going to kill or be killed. And so now he says, why don't we all get together? Let's make a social compact. Also could be called a social contract. And he said, let's decide in this compact how it is that we can get along. That we're not going to steal things that don't belong to us. We're not going to kill each other in cold blood. We're not going to lie. We're not going to run through stop signs. We're going to have a set of rights that we all have. And the reason why we're going to do these is because self-preservation. It's in my best interest. So it's very much a consequence. So for him then, he's going to say, you have these laws of nature and you have a state of nature. The state of nature, kill or be killed. The laws of nature, as we're talking about this inclination for peace, they're within this social compact. You relativistically decided how we are going to get along, okay? So that brings about your laws of nature, and you got to pick them. You got to pick these laws. And if Rhonda decides she doesn't want one of these laws, she doesn't have much option, because it comes back to an egoistic notion that she can either live within these laws of nature, or she can go back out into the state of nature and kill or be killed.
But there's consequences.
Yeah, there are consequences, and it's very nice to be allowed to live within this compact. So let's see how he develops this, how he builds up this compact then. Anything you'd like to say to that general summary, David?
No, we have the linchpins of his philosophy beginning to precipitate out of all this stuff, and so the state of nature is a natural condition of human beings. In the state of nature, we have complete freedom or rights, and if you have something that I want, in the state of nature, I have the right to try to take it from you. But human beings also are rational, and it's a law of nature that we should try to get out of the state of nature if we can figure out how to do so. And thankfully, Thomas Hobbes is going to tell us how to do so.
Okay, and very good. He starts giving us these definitions that David had given us. So let's move right on into this first one. And Cassie, would you read the next one for us?
Sure. The right of nature, which writers commonly call
Jus natural.
Jus natural, is the liberty each man has to use his own power as he will himself, for the preservation of his own nature, that is to say, his own life.
Very good. And he continues on with that. And would you continue on?
Yeah. The right of nature, by all means we can, to defend ourselves.
Okay, so that's going to give you the right of nature. But he's going to hope that you don't have to resort to that, that we can get things going good enough that you won't have to resort to it. But no matter what the social compact is, he never backs out on that. He says you will always have a right to defend yourself. So he's telling you, you still can watch out for number one. So let's move to the next graphic. And Rhonda, would you read this one for us?
A law of nature. A law of nature, lex naturalis, is a precept or general rule found out by reason, by which a man is forbidden to do that which is destructive to his life, or takes away the means of preserving the same, and to omit that by which he thinks it may be best preserved.
Okay, very good. So there is our law of nature then, and where this is going to fit in. And now let's look at these last 2 points, the right versus the law of nature. And Lloyd, could you read that?
Yeah, because right consists in liberty to do or to forbear, whereas law determines and binds to one of them.
Okay, very good. So we've got this differentiation, David. We've got a right, and now we've got a law. And why is it that Hobbes is going to pull these two together?
Well, a law, in my reading of Hobbes, is a precept of rationality that as egoists we want to get to improve our condition, and it's built into the human constitution to think how we may improve our state.
Okay.
And as we're about to see, rationality may dictate by law that we give up some of our rights, our freedoms, and that is the gateway to civilization.
Very good. So we're getting some rights. We may have to give up some, but we're getting some as well. So let's see where he gives us our first law of nature. And this is where the most important precept comes through. He wants you to live. He wants you to have peace. So John, would you read this for us?
First law of nature, keep the peace or fight the war, that every man ought to endeavor peace as far as he has hope of obtaining it.
Okay, and he goes into more depth on this, but he basically says that every person, if you want to avoid war, if you want to stay out of this state of war, this state of nature, you should endeavor for peace. And let's read the next quote then. And Rhonda, would you read this one for us, please?
Are we on the second?
The second law of nature.
That a man be willing, when others are so too, as far forth as for peace and defense of himself, he shall think it necessary to lay down this right to all things, and be contented with so much liberty against other men as he would allow other men against himself.
Okay, thanks, Rhonda. And so you can see these two precepts are very important, and he's actually pulling in the golden rule here, even though he is avoiding talking about religion. A lot of people say this is basically saying, listen, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Anything you'd like to add to either of those first two precepts and why they're so important, why they are the foundation to his other 12?
Well, it's the logical outcome of his line of reasoning, and that is if we can improve our condition by giving up some of our rights, if I am willing to give up my right to steal from you and to take over your green pasture and so on and so forth, your possessions, if I'm willing to give up some of my rights, it may be rational to do so if I can improve my state of affairs in everyday life.
Okay, and just as Dr. Keller is telling, he's always going to come back to, this is in your best interest. So Cassie, would you read this next graphic for us, which reminds us, this is the reason why you're doing this.
Transferring of right motivated by self-interest. Whensoever a man transfers his right or renounces it, it is either in consideration of some right reciprocally transferred to himself or for some other good he hopes for thereby. For it is a voluntary act, and of the voluntary acts of every man, the object is some good to himself.
Okay, very good. And so here he's going to say, it is a voluntary act, as Dr. Keller pointed out, but you are going to see some good for yourself. So you're not going to be taking Cassie's toys or taking her pasture land, but you will also have the right that Lloyd's not going to come take your stuff.
That's right.
And so you may have given up something, but you have certainly attained something as well. And let's go to the next graphic then, and this tells us about what a contract is. And this just tells us that a contract is the transferring of rights, that which all men call contract. All right, and then let's move to the next graphic, which moves into the origins of justice. And by the way, I could say about this social contract and social compact that this can also be called the social contract or a form of justice theory. That we're moving in here and he's saying this is how we have a justice. This is how we can all get along together. And it kind of becomes a we the people proposition, other than he leaves in a crazy sovereign who can mess things up. But I'm not going to talk about that today, I don't think. So let's go ahead and see what he says about the origin of justice. And could you read that for us, Rhonda?
Sure. And in this law of nature consists the fountain and original of justice. For where no covenant has preceded, there has no right been transferred. And every man has right to everything, and consequently no action can be unjust. But when a covenant is made, then to break it, it is unjust. And the definition of injustice is no other than the not performance of covenant.
Okay, thank you. So here we are at this not performance of covenant. And I'm going to tell you just a little bit more about that in our third law of nature. But then he's going to say, this whole thing's going to fall apart if we can't have this social compact. So you can see it kind of like a circle where we've got all these rights in here, or these laws, if we want to call them, and we're all going to obey them. And we have to covenant. We have to covenant that we'll keep these. Now, how is a covenant different than a promise? How is a covenant different than a promise, Ben?
John.
John. Did I call you Ben earlier?
No.
Oh, thank you. John.
A covenant is more of an agreement between two people, where a promise is one person saying that they'll do something to another person. So, I mean, a promise really involves one person saying something to another, where a covenant is going to involve more than one person.
More than one. And here he's going to say, this is your society, this is your community. And if you can't keep these, you're out. Okay, now, right now you might say, oh, well, big deal. But in Hobbes' time, that is a big deal, because if you can't perform your covenants that you've made, then you no longer get to be part of this society, and now you're back in a state of war, kill or be killed. So there, once again, self-preservation. You're an egoist, and he's saying, stay in this covenant, stay in this compact.
You know, about covenant, it's not just something that it goes with two people, but it's also it's an agreement. If I do this, you'll do that.
Right. Yeah. If I
so
do,
there's something back and forth.
Right. If I don't take your food, you won't come over and steal my car. So. Okay. Well, Cassie, would you read the third law of nature for us, please? And this ties right into the covenants.
Third law of nature, keep your promises. From that law of nature by which we are obliged to transfer to another such rights as, being retained, hinder the peace of mankind, there follows a third, which is this, that men perform their covenants made, without which covenants are in vain and but empty words, and the right of all men to all things remaining, we are still in the condition of war.
Okay, thanks. Anything you'd like to add to that, David?
Well, we've, with these last three slides, in my view, we've really seen the threads of Hobbes's ethical theory come together in a fabric, a coherent fabric, and that is he's laid out how it's rational for us to give up some of our freedoms, to kill, steal, and harm other people, which are our freedoms in a state of nature, and it's rational for us to make a mutual agreement, as John pointed out, between each other to give up some of these freedoms, and we can improve the state of our affairs by doing so. And thirdly, I think that it shows that we live in a social contract society. We have agreed by virtue of living in culture to give up some of our rights, to kill, to steal, to harm other people, and we transfer some of those rights to a third party, which we would really call the judiciary and the police force, the justice system. And the justice system has the power to punish us, the right that we've given up. We don't have the right to punish one another. We have transferred that freedom over to the judiciary. So the importance of this episode for me is to show how, for Hobbes, justice is the product of an arrangement between us, and does not have a transcendent source as it did for Plato, and how we live fundamentally in a social contract society as inspired by Hobbes. And that's the value of studying Hobbes today.
Okay, very good. Now, from Leviathan, which is where this reading comes. This comes from Leviathan and is an important work of Hobbes. He actually gives us 12 that we're going to look at, but we've gone through the fundamental first 3, as Dr. Keller's pointed out. Lloyd, do you have a comment for us?
I was going to say, I think one thing that's important to remember is that what Hobbes is doing is he's not necessarily saying this is how we should be, this is the ideal, but he's calling these laws of nature. He's looking at the world and saying, look, this isn't just how we should be, this is how we are. This is what we're doing already. It's not some ideal or something future he wants to happen. He's saying, look, these are laws of nature. These are how we act in the world today. It's not something big and surprising. It's when I drive down the street, I'm acting by these laws of nature as I'm giving each other, and we're exchanging rights in everything we do.
Very good. Good comment. Anyone else? John?
Yeah, going along with what Lloyd's saying, I mean, Hobbes in the reading, page 20, first column at the bottom, he even questions whether or not this state of nature, this absolute state of war, could even exist. And I think Lloyd points out something really important, that it might not, because this is how nature is. I mean, we are going to make these social contracts because that's what's in our nature. And so that state of war may not even ever exist.
All right. So. Good point. Good point from both of you. And Cassie, could you read for us our 4th law of nature?
4th law of nature, no regrets. That a man which receives benefit from another of mere grace endeavor, that which he gives it, have no reasonable cause to repent him of his goodwill.
Thanks, Cassie. You know, Cassie, this reading is very difficult. We're back to the 1500s, and the sentences are long. It seems like there should be more punctuation in there. Mm-hmm. And that's why this is another reading that students will need to read 2 or 3 times. But David, I think that once the students read it 2 or 3 times, they can also see how foundational this is to the system of rights that we have in this country. Do you agree with that?
That's right. You can't understand current political philosophy without understanding Hobbes.
Okay.
So you have to slog through the archaic language. And
basically, Cassie, this is just saying, if I want to do something nice for you, you need to let me do it. If I bring you over a cake and say, we don't want none of your cake, then it makes me want to go to war with you. Mm-hmm. Okay, of course I don't want to go to war with you, but that's how Hobbes is going to put it. He's saying, this is how we avoid war. This is how we avoid quarrel. This is how we stay in our compact and get along. So let's look at this 5th law of nature, and would you read that for us, John?
Yes, I will. 5th law of nature, try to get along. That every man strive to accommodate himself to the rest.
Okay, so we're going to try to get along. And can you think of anything worse, Lloyd, than when you want to go out with your friends and you've all picked a movie and then you're ready to go and someone says, oh, you know what, I don't want to see that movie. Why is it so important to accommodate yourself to the rest?
Well, because it makes it so nothing works out. My friend, if he sees us, he'll kill me for us. But I've got one friend that every time I want to go see a movie, it seems like he's always the one who's like, oh, I don't want to see it. So then everyone else is like, oh, okay, well, we don't want to see it now. And then we end up not doing anything at all. And so if one person's not willing to participate, then society itself doesn't seem to catch on and be able to move through.
Okay, good. Well, let's move on to the next law, which says the law of forgiveness. And Rhonda, could you read the 6th law of nature?
Which is forgiveness, that upon caution of a future time, a man ought to pardon the offenses past of them that, repenting, desire it.
Okay, thanks. So we need to forgive. And it's just a very important concept for him. He says, get over it, get past it. If someone comes to you and says, I'm sorry I did that, I shouldn't have done it, forgive me, do it, move past it. Well, let's look at the next one, because David, this is just a little bit more complicated, and it's about revenge. And it tells us that in revenge, that is retribution of evil for evil, men look not at the greatness of the evil past, but the greatness of the good to follow. Do you want to tell us a little bit about revenge, David?
Well, in the state of nature, there's nothing wrong with revenge, right? Because everything is allowed. But once we enter the social contract and found a civilization, we give up our right to exact revenge because we're harming somebody else. And really what, in my mind, what this passage is a passage against vigilantism, that is taking justice into your own hands. If somebody is guilty of violating the social contract, and you know that, it's not your place in society to mete out the punishment. You have to transfer that to the police force. And so while revenge might be justified on one level, in the social contract, it's not.
Okay, very good. And our next one that we move on into is talking about contempt. And in this one, John, could you read that?
Yes. The eighth law of nature, contempt. That no man by deed, word, countenance, or gesture declare hatred or contempt of another.
Okay, thank you. So you just don't show contempt. You don't show it with a hand signal. You don't give it verbally. You don't show contempt, because by showing contempt, you're just asking for an altercation. Let's read our next one, which talks about equality, such an important concept for Hobbes. And Cassie, would you read that?
Ninth law of nature, equality, that every man acknowledge another for his equal by nature.
Okay, and Rhonda, tell us about equality in Hobbes.
The equality that each man and woman and child, just humanity in general, are equal. That, again, we went back to it earlier, that you strip off the skin, we're all the same.
Okay, thank you. And we have three more laws where we look at the 10th, 11th, and 12th laws. The first one says, if you're going into peace, then go to peace. Don't say, okay, I'll have peace if you'll do this, 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 and this for me. The 11th law says, if you are appointed a judge, you must always be a fair judge. If you're an unfair judge, you're going to start a war. And the third one, law of nature, is equality. The 12th law of nature is one of equality. And he's going to say, listen, if we all have a public park, let's all share it equally. Don't one of you come in and think you can take it over and that it's yours. Well, we had to finish up this episode very quickly, Dr. Keller, but thanks so much for being with us. And after this, we're going to move on into Immanuel Kant. And so start doing your reading, and good luck on your tests. Bye-bye.